What up, team? It's your boy MurderInc here. Today we're going to be talking about the worst of the worst, which you don't want to see in this game when you're pulling shards, because we know the chance is so low. So let's get right into it and see which legendaries I'm considering the worst you could possibly pull. Alright guys, so we're going to kick off this video. First, I want to clarify a few things when I get into this list. Give me your feedback, leave a comment. I want to know how your worst champions that you could possibly pull are going to be different from mine, just in case they are. I think we're going to be on the same page because these videos are always fun to go over, but let's just talk about it. 0.5% chance from a void or an ancient shard to pull legendary, 6% chance from a sacred shard. Now, with those chances being so low, when you pull one, you should be overwhelmed with joy. That's what we all want. That's what we all need from a legendary. But some champions, despite Plarium's, I'm not going to say best effort, but effort has been made to allow us to see balance patches. I want to say more frequently. We all know a few things happened that slowed their pace down a little bit, but it has been definitely more quickly than the start of the game. So with that being said, there are absolutely champions that are on a very large spectrum between really good and really bad as far as legendaries go. So I'm going to go over my picks for the worst legendaries you don't ever want to pull in this game that don't include login rewards or Doom Tower champions, because if you do pull a login reward, you get a free duplicate for your faction guardian, which is a bonus even if some of those champions are pretty bad, which I do think they are. And Doom Tower, of course, you cannot pull them from shards, so they're not going to be on this list. So without further ado, let's start. The first champion I want to talk about here today is going to be a cool looking champion. I've talked about this guy, Hulsring. Hulsring, what does he do? Attacks 2 times at random. I cannot stress this enough. Plarium, get rid of this from the game. Nobody likes random. RNG is already a major part of this game. Don't add it to skills. Make it AoE or single target. If you're going to make it random, make it some interesting interaction where if a target does get hit twice by a skill that attacks at random, it does something crazy, like insane to the champion, like one-shots them. Maybe that's a little bit over the top, but you get my point here. Place a 50% increased attack buff from the champion if it's critical. Yes, it's an A1 that self-buffs increased attack, but it's not AoE, right? It's just on this champion. Moving on to the A2, once again, attacks 3 times at random. Will ignore 25% of the champion's defense against targets under Hex. Will ignore a further 25% against targets that are Bannerlords or Knight Rev factions. So some interesting things here. I did mention when these champions came out, maybe we're going to see some faction-based content in the future, but we don't have it now, so I do have to say this guy is one of the worst. And again, attacks 4 times at random with this A3 here. Has a 74% chance of placing a Hex for 3 turns, cannot be resisted if they are from those factions. Each hit has a 75% chance of stealing. Turn meter steals 50% if they are from the special factions. If this champion's turn meter is at 75% or more after the steal, places a perfect veil on this champion for 2 turns. Who cares? This is a legendary. Legendaries are big investments, legendary books, all of that good things. It requires more materials to ascend them. You should never see a kit like this. If this champion attacks 2 targets under Hex debuffs during the same turn, places a perfect veil buff on this champion for 1 turn, will not count counter attacks, increases critical damage by 30% while under a perfect veil buff. Once again, there's just not much to this. It's okay, and no legendary should ever be considered okay. And I mean, I'm coping so hard right now just calling this guy okay. He looks cool, but that's about it. Moving on to the next champion, is also going to be in the Sacred Order. I was hesitant to put him on the list here, but some champions that you might think are really bad, but they have niche uses. What I mean by that is they're really strong for a specific Doom Tower boss like Samar Gemcurse, who's really good at Bommel. Bommel is a hurdle for a lot of players. Some of the easier Doom Tower bosses you may not agree with, so if a champion counters the Magma Dragon with the taunting, they're not going to be on this list, and maybe you think they should, but the reason why I put Eriel here is he's really good against an affinity keep dungeon that can simply be outpowered and outscaled because we don't have stage 25 affinity keep dungeons. If they had gone to 25 and got significantly harder, giving us more rewards, maybe Eriel would be a very strong champion to get rid of that shield from the blue affinity magic keep boss. But the fact that it's a target enemy, it's just way too niche of a skill to say this is a really good kit for a legendary. If it was an AoE, this champion would be incredible with this negation skill. Next we have Helmbreaker, attacks one enemy 3 times, 30% chance of inflicting in a critical hit, so you only need 70% crit chance. Each hit has a 50% chance to ignore defense. Why not just make it ignores all defense? That would definitely make this a bit better for sure. And the A1, once again, with that critical hit chance benefit you are getting, so on the A1, A2, and A3, it makes it so all you have to do is build 70% crit rate for this champion to have 100% crit rate. It's just not good enough. Yes, the aura is decent. He has good base speed at 104, really good base attack, but his kit is just lacking so much to say this is such a feel-good legendary to pull, because we talked about the percentages you get for pulling legendary, and it should just feel much better than what Eriel brings to the table. The next champion we're going to be talking about is going to be the Orc Nagdar, the Headhunter, straight out of Lord of the Rings. I believe it's the Urukai. Could be wrong. Listen, if you're a Lord of the Rings nerd and you're mad at me, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. But he looks like a Lord of the Rings guy, really cool aesthetics to him, but his kit attacks one enemy, heals his champions by 10% of their max HP, grants an extra turn if this kills an enemy. How many A1s are killing enemies? Think about it just for a second. Counterattack, maybe, but I don't know. A2 attacks all enemies after attacking this champion, sacrifices HP equal to 50% of their max HP, then places 2 15% continuous heal buffs on this champion. The HP sacrifice will happen even if it kills this champion. Now listen to this really quickly. This is a 5-turn cooldown, so this could hit hard. It takes half of his health, puts on a heal, 2 heal buffs to be specific, to kind of get him back up to that next level, but he's going to need to get a turn again. What happens if he gets those buffs taken from him? He becomes a useless champion, right? Right. So not a fan of this. They could have done so many cool things with this champion. Next we have sacrifices HP equal to 50% of this champion's max HP, then equalizes HP levels with the target enemy. The HP levels of both this champion and the target enemy will be brought down to the level of the one with the lowest HP. Doesn't work against bosses. This champion cannot be killed by this skill. Okay, so now we have an A2 that can kill him and an A3 that cannot kill him. So what does that mean? You have to use the A2 before the A3 unless you want this guy to die, because it's 50%, right? So you're using 50% here, 50% there. What's 50 plus 50? 100. That's his full health bar. If you use the A2 first, you get continuous heal, so he's going to heal back up before he uses the last rights ability, which is probably the intended purpose of this as it stands. Then he has this passive. He revives this champion with 50% HP and turn meter when killed if all other allies are alive. Is it likely he's going to die first? Yeah, probably, based on how ridiculous this kit does not work if there are multiple Nagdars on this team. Listen, it's a cool idea for sure, but maybe it's just me. I feel like they put no thought into this champion at all. They could have done so many cool things to this champion. What I would have done is put some type of AoE CC on this A2 here. Just give him something that helps prevent him from getting hit, so he can use this wombo combo here, getting to low health, and it would just be so much better. Put an AoE stun on the A2, AoE sleep, whatever you want to do, but just make it worthwhile if we're going to be pulling this champion so we have somewhere to use it. Right. Moving on to the next champion, and the next 2 champions are going to be from this faction. You probably guessed it. You're going to see someone on here that's not on the list, and I will talk about them for sure, but Jing, another really cool looking champion. Aesthetic wise, I went over it when it came out, but he just falls so short. Attacks one enemy, transfers a random debuff from this champion to the target. If he has no debuffs on him, this is a useless interaction here. So I don't like skills like that as it is. A2 attacks one enemy, has a 74% chance of increasing the duration of 2 random debuffs on the target by 1 turn, also places a block active skills if the target's under decreased accuracy and decreased crit damage, which you can then assume what's going to happen next year. So this in itself is very underwhelming because the interaction, you would say, okay, this screams clan boss, right? Increases the duration of 2 random debuffs on the target by 1 turn. What is 1 turn when the cooldown's 4 turns and you need to book him to get it to 2 turn cooldown? 2 turn cooldowns is really good, but the fact that you need books to bring it all the way down to 2 and it starts on 4 is just way too underwhelming. So moving on to the A3, attacks all enemies 2 times. Okay, double hit AoE, can't complain. First hit has an 80% chance of placing decreased accuracy, definitely a strong buff. The second hit has an 80% chance of placing decreased crit damage. Now, why isn't this a good debuff? Why is this arguably one of the worst debuffs? Because if you know about PvE content in this game, the baseline crit rate for all non-PvP or player-based combat in this game is 15%. So you're decreasing crit damage for a 15% chance to get crit unless you find a way to use this guy in PvP, and you're not using this guy in PvP. I don't have to tell you that, you already know that, but you're just not. Next we have Unchained, immune to fear, true fear, freeze, provoke, sleep, stun, and petrification. Whenever one of those debuffs are placed on an ally, it removes it and then places block debuff on that ally for 2 turns. Now this is pretty good. If this was just a passive with a 1 turn cooldown, 2 turn cooldowns, he might in fact be viable for PvP. The fact that Stone Skin exists, the fact that Reaction Gear exists, this cooldown is way too long to compete in the type of meta we're currently in right now, making this just not as good as a cleanser, not as good as someone that has a 2 turn, 3 turn cooldown that's an epic champion that isn't going to require such a hefty book investment, because yes, you only need 2 books into the passive, but what if it doesn't land into the passive first? You're now using legendary books and it's just a disaster. So if you pulled Jing, you have a cool looking champion for sure, but how far is he going to get you? In my opinion, not very far, but like I said, if you disagree, definitely leave me a comment below. So the next champion I'm going to talk about is one that I didn't include on this list, but I'm going to explain why here. So Noble, everyone says Noble's really bad. I don't 100% disagree, however, but I don't think he's bad enough to be considered the worst legendary in the game. Going over his kit, I'll kind of explain why. Attacks 1 enemy, 40% chance of decreasing the duration of 2 random debuffs on the target by 1 turn. If it's under fear or true fear, has a 65% chance of decreasing the duration of all of the target buffs by 1 turn instead. So this is good as far as synergy with a fear or true fear goes. Next, we have attacks 1 enemy, will ignore defense, fills his champion's turn meter after the attack. If the target's under fear or true fear, decreases the cooldown of dismay by 1 turn. Dismay is going to be this A3, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of lowering the turn meter by 50%. If they're under fear or true fear, will also fill this champion's turn meter by the amount those enemies lose. So of course, as we see here, 50%. Moving on to the passive, whenever an enemy's turn meter is fully depleted by any champion, has a 75% chance of placing a true fear debuff on that enemy for 1 turn. So as a whole, his kit isn't that good. If you don't have fear or true fear, this champion is literally the worst or one of the worst and would make this list for sure. However, if you pair this with someone like Mashal that has an AoE true fear, you can actually use this guy if you are in a progression state in this game as a form of ceasing your champions, giving you really strong crowd control while paired with someone like Mashal here. How hard is he going to hit? He has pretty decent base attack here. The speed isn't crazy, but isn't too terrible at 98 base speed here. He does have 63% crit damage baseline, so it's not 50% being on the lower threshold. He's an attack based champion, so throwing this guy in a accuracy based stun set wouldn't be the worst thing for a new player if they did get them, but once again, it's heavily reliant on having that Truth Fear debuff. And one issue why, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. We're putting him on the list of the worst here, because now that I'm talking about it, I just cannot justify it. What if you don't have a Truth Fear champion, right? Then he just becomes useless. This is the problem. His passive is way too hard to pull off in any realistic scenario. Fully depleting an enemy champion's turn meter is hard to do. You can do it by chance for sure, but you would have to speed tune to make sure this is happening if you want to use this guy in any content. And to do that for each wave throughout progression, no one's taking the time to speed tune based on the enemy's turn meter on how to fully deplete it with this A3 here of a 50% turn meter decrease. So what you would basically have to do is you'd have to make him slightly faster than the enemy waves here, and then you would have to make him slower than the enemy waves. And if you're not sure about this, the enemy waves are base speed. So if you ever look at stage 20 dungeons and you see some epics in there or some legendaries in the enemy waves and you're wondering how fast are these guys, they are their base speed on top of course, any speed increase or any buffs that are given to them on those enemy waves here. So if they really wanted to put in the effort to make this guy work, they would have given him the lowest base speed in the game, so you could build him with no speed at all, making sure the enemy waves always go first. Or what they could have done is they could have made his base speed extremely high, so you go fast enough to where Noble gets a turn, the enemy gets a turn, then Noble goes right after, because he is so fast without making you have to put insane speed gear on him in a progression format, because who wants to do that? So that's going to be my list on the champions that I think are the worst champions, ones you would hate to see pulling. If you have any additions to this list, let me know in the comments. Now, a lot of people consider legendaries bad when they pull them on their account and they don't have a use for them. I'm looking for more of champions, if you want to think of it outside the box, applied to every single account in the game, which I know is impossible to do. It was impossible for me to do for this account, so I tried to do my best to pick what skills kind of made no sense and kind of put it on Plarium. I would love to see every champion I mentioned and many more legendaries that I didn't mention get buffed so they're a little bit closer to the best champions in the game, because I mean, think about Sifi, Rhodos, Trunda, every good champion you can think of, Kaimar, the list goes on, and then compare them to 80% of the other, if not 90% of the other legendaries in this game here. The gap is just way too big. It's Plarium's job to shrink that gap significantly. So that's going to conclude this video here today. Give me your thoughts, give me your feedback. As always, if you enjoyed this content, smash the like button, subscribe, turn the notification bell, and I will see you all in my next upload.